Let's start with a simple truth. Human beings are not obsessed with what they understand. They're obsessed with what they don't. The unknown, the unpredictable, the mysterious. That's where the mind fixates. And in the realm of relationships, this holds especially true. When a woman becomes a mystery, a shift occurs deep inside a man's psychology. It's not manipulation. It's not about games. It's about energy, space, unpredictability, and the tension it creates in the human psyche. In our fast-paced world, everything is available at a click. Answers, entertainment, even people. We've become addicted to immediacy. But what comes easy rarely feels valuable. That's why when a woman becomes fully available, emotionally predictable, constantly accessible, she can become unknowingly forgettable. Not because she lacks worth, but because she offers no psychological challenge. There's no tension, no riddle to solve. The mind disengages, but when a woman begins to pull back, not in bitterness, but in self-containment, something profound happens. A man's attention sharpens. His focus intensifies. Why? Because uncertainty activates a very specific psychological mechanism, the Zeigarnik effect. This is a principle in psychology that explains why people remember incomplete or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. The human brain doesn't like unfinished stories. So when a woman becomes less emotionally predictable, when she stops explaining every feeling, when she doesn't over-communicate her inner world, she becomes, consciously or unconsciously, an unfinished story in his mind. And that's when obsession begins. It's not about being cold. It's about being rooted in your center. A woman who has stopped broadcasting every emotion, who no longer fills the silences with validation, who isn't on a constant loop of reassurance. She introduces mystery, and mystery introduces magnetism. This is not something new. In fact, ancient spiritual teachings, from Taoism to Zen, have long taught the value of emptiness, of non-attachment, of silence. In Shaolin philosophy, mystery is not absence. It is presence without noise. It is strength held inwardly, not broadcast outwardly. That kind of energy doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't perform. It simply is. And when a woman embodies that presence, her aura expands. She becomes someone a man can't quite figure out. And the human mind hates not being able to figure things out. That's where pursuit is born. You see, the moment a man believes he has full access, emotional, physical, spiritual, without ever having to earn it, he slips into complacency. But when he senses depth he hasn't explored yet, emotions he hasn't unlocked, layers he hasn't peeled back, he starts to lean in. The mystery begins to take up space in his thoughts. He wonders what she's doing, who she's becoming, why she no longer tries to explain herself. And this wondering, it becomes craving. Now let's be clear, becoming a mystery isn't about being fake, difficult, or emotionally unavailable. It's not about weaponizing silence. It's about honoring your inner world and realizing that not everyone is entitled to all of you. A woman with boundaries, with self-awareness, with emotional discipline. She doesn't withhold to punish, she withholds to protect her. And in that self-protection, she becomes rare. And what is rare becomes valuable. When a woman no longer lives in the energy of proving her worth, when she no longer tries to convince a man to see her, or decode her, or stay with her, she rises above the dynamic of validation. She becomes energy in motion, focused, present, and hard to pin down. She doesn't rush to answer. She doesn't over-explain her absence. She simply allows the space to speak for itself. And that space speaks louder than any words could. Why does this work? because we chase what eludes us. Not because we're shallow, but because the human mind craves new challenge. When we don't fully understand something, we try to. We obsess. We repeat mental loops. We imagine possibilities. And when the subject of that loop is a woman, strong, contained, emotionally sovereign, it creates a vortex of attraction. But the power doesn't lie in playing hard to get. It lies in being hard to forget. And that only happens when a woman pulls her energy inward. When she realizes that her greatest power isn't in how much she gives, but in how deeply she values her own presence. So, if you're a woman listening to this, and you're wondering how to shift the dynamic in your relationship, start here. Stop explaining yourself. Stop chasing connection. Stop pouring energy into places that don't pour back. Instead, become the mystery. Become the woman who is not fully known, yet deeply felt. Because when a woman becomes a mystery, a man becomes obsessed. Not because she tried to hook him, but because she walked away from the need to be understood and stepped fully into the power of being you herself. And that is unforgettable. There is something deeply magnetic about a woman who has mastered the art of emotional detachment. Not coldness, not indifference, but a calm, inner stillness that cannot be disturbed by the external movements of another person. This is where real power lives. And when a man encounters this type of woman, he feels it instantly. He may not be able to explain it, but he knows I do. She's not operating from a place of need. She's not clinging. She's not trying to win him. She's not emotionally invested in controlling outcomes. That absence of emotional dependency is what pulls him in. We live in a world where overexpression is mistaken for connection. The more you say, the more you text, the more you emote. Somehow, we've been taught that means we care. But the truth is, when someone is centered, they no longer use emotional noise to prove anything. Emotional detachment is not the absence of feelings. It's the mastery of them. It means you can feel love, attraction, desire, but not lose your center in the process. You remain rooted in your values, your peace, your path. This is where obsession begins. Not in drama, but in discipline. When a woman detaches emotionally, she changes the dynamic without saying a single word. She no longer reacts. She no longer over-explains. She doesn't argue to convince. She doesn't stay to be seen. Instead, she withdraws her energy from any space that disrespects it. And this silent withdrawal creates a presence far louder than any confrontation ever could. A man begins to feel the void she once filled. He begins to question the certainty he once had. Suddenly, he's no longer sure if he still has her attention. And in that moment of uncertainty, something awakens in him. Desire, focus, and often obsession. Understand this: a man's ego is accustomed to being fed. When it's no longer being fed by a woman's constant availability, by her emotional affirmations, by her attention, it starves. And in that starvation, the man begins to feel her absence in places he didn't even realize she occupied. That's when the chase begins. Not because she manipulated anything, but because she recentered herself. In Shaolin philosophy, discipline is considered the highest form of freedom. Emotional detachment is discipline. It is the refusal to become a slave to your emotions. It is choosing clarity over chaos, choosing peace over power struggles. A woman who embodies this doesn't need to pretend she doesn't care. She genuinely values herself, often not to over-invest where she's not honored. And that kind of woman cannot be easily replaced. Let's go even deeper. From a psychological perspective, emotional detachment is a high-level boundary. It signals to others I will not sacrifice my inner stability for the sake of external validation. And most people are not used to this. They are used to pushing buttons and getting a reaction. But when you no longer react, you are no longer controlled. That is what confuses and captivates a man the most. The moment he realizes he cannot emotionally destabilize you is the moment he starts to feel destabilized by your silence. Now, this doesn't mean you cut off compassion. Emotional detachment isn't about becoming hard. It's about becoming soft but strong. It's the strength to walk away, not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself more. It's knowing your emotions, but not allowing them to guide you into chaos. It's feeling love and not confusing it with possession. This is where true feminine power lies. In the space where emotion and self-worth coexist, but never collapse into each other. A woman who is emotionally detached knows when to stay, and she knows when to go. She knows when something is disturbing her peace, and she doesn't justify staying in situations that dishonor her. She doesn't beg, plead, or perform. And because she doesn't need a man to feel complete, her love becomes a choice, not a survival strategy. That's when a man starts chasing. Not the woman who is trying to prove her worth, but the one who already knows it. There's a deep, spiritual elegance in that type of self-control. When a woman's energy is no longer focused outward, trying to read his messages, decode his silences, interpret his behavior, but instead turned inward toward her own growth, goals, and grounding, she becomes a force. Her detachment becomes a quiet reminder. I am enough, with or without your attention. And let's be honest, attention is everywhere. But energy is sacred. The woman who knows this gives less, not to punish, but to preserve. She doesn't waste her essence trying to hold someone who was never meant to stay. She doesn't try to be everything to everyone. She simply becomes everything to herself. And in doing so, she becomes unforgettable. So if you're seeking to shift the dynamic, don't speak more. Don't try harder, don't give louder. Instead, step back. Reclaim your peace. Move with grace, and let the silence show them what your words never could. Because when a woman becomes emotionally detached, she becomes a mirror. And what a man sees in that mirror is not her emptiness. It's his own lack of depth. That's when the obsession begins. There's a moment in every woman's life where she realizes something powerful. Being liked is not the same as being valued. And in that moment, a transformation begins. She stops contorting herself to fit into other people's expectations. She stops performing for approval. She no longer exists to entertain, please, or be chosen. She chooses herself, and in doing so, she rises. Not as someone who's above others, but as someone who's finally standing on her own ground. This is what we call the rise of the high-value woman. And the paradox: the less she tries to impress, the more unforgettable she becomes. We live in a world that rewards women for being easy to access, emotionally, physically, mentally. A world that encourages overgiving, oversharing, and self-sacrifice disguised as love. But true self-worth begins when a woman understands that giving all of herself away, especially to someone who hasn't earned it, is not generosity, it's self-abandonment. The high-value woman is not hard because she's bitter. She's discerning because she's healed. She no longer equates attention with affection, and she doesn't confuse intensity with intimacy. She knows her value not in theory, but in practice, and that shows up in how she speaks, how she moves, and most importantly, what she no longer tolerates. She doesn't demand respect. She requires it by the way she carries herself. From a psychological perspective, what makes a high-value woman so captivating to men is the emotional standard she sets. She's not interested in chaos, games, or emotional inconsistency. She doesn't chase, because she doesn't need to. Her energy says, if you want access to me, you must rise to meet me where I already am. This isn't arrogance. It's emotional clarity. Men become obsessed not because she withholds affection, but because she offers it selectively. And in a world full of emotional desperation, that selectiveness feels rare. And what feels rare always feels valuable. You see, men don't chase women who are always available, always agreeable, always giving. They chase the woman who challenges them. Not with conflict, but with presence. She doesn't have to raise her voice. Her silence speaks. She doesn't have to argue. Her standards speak. She doesn't have to control. Her absence speaks. And what do all of these have in common? A power without aggression. Feminine strength that doesn't need to imitate masculinity to be effective. Shaolin wisdom teaches us that the most powerful force is not loud. It is consistent, disciplined, and still. A flame doesn't scream to be seen, it just burns. That's the high-value woman. She's not trying to prove that she's enough. She simply knows she is. And that knowing is what sets her apart. Men can sense when a woman is seeking to be chosen versus when she has already chosen herself. One creates pursuit, the other creates imbalance. Philosophically, we must understand the difference between attraction and attachment. Attachment seeks to possess. Attraction seeks to grow. A man becomes obsessed with a high-value woman, not because he possesses her, but because he can't quite capture her essence. She keeps evolving. She keeps expanding. Her identity is not wrapped in a relationship. It's anchored in purpose. And when a man witnesses that kind of self-possession, it wakes something up in him. He either rises to meet her, or he fades away. But either way, she doesn't shrink. And that's the lesson: don't shrink to fit. Don't soften your voice so he'll stay. Don't lower your standards so he'll choose you. Because the moment you betray yourself to keep someone is the moment you've already lost them. Men don't become obsessed with women who blend in. They become obsessed with women who stand out. Not just in beauty or style, but in new substance, in self-respect, in emotional depth. The high-value woman doesn't beg to be understood. She understands herself. She doesn't fear solitude. She uses it to refine her spirit. And when she loves fully, but never blindly. Her love is not an open door to anyone who knocks. It's a space that must be earned. And that is what makes her unforgettable. So if you are listening to this, and you feel like you've been giving too much, trying too hard, or losing pieces of yourself in the process of being liked, this is your invitation to stop, to turn inward, to rise, not through anger, but through alignment, not through noise, but through stillness. Because the woman who stops trying to be liked becomes the woman who is admired. The woman who stops chasing becomes the one who is remembered. And the woman who stops performing becomes the one who is desired not just for her body, but for her presence. The obsession begins the moment a woman stops trying to fit into his world and starts building her own. There is something profoundly attractive about a woman who is no longer consumed by proving her worth to anyone. Not because she doesn't care, but because she's too focused on building a life that fulfills her. She isn't trying to be mysterious. She simply no longer places all her energy into being understood by someone else. Her focus has shifted from I, him to ooh, her mission, her peace, her vision. And that shift in direction creates a shift in attraction. Because nothing stirs the mind of a man more than a woman who is not waiting for him to call. She's too busy answering her own. Let's take a step back and consider what desire really is. Desire is not born out of constant presence. It is born from space. And space is created when a woman detaches herself from the need to constantly explain where she is, how she feels, what she needs. When she starts moving differently, not with coldness, but with purpose, she becomes harder to read. Her energy is no longer pointed at one person. It's flowing in many directions. Toward her health, her growth, her creativity, her discipline. She starts living for something bigger than attention. And when that happens, she becomes magnetic. Not because she is seeking to attract, but because she has become attractive to herself. This is not about pretending to be busy or creating artificial distance. It's about filling your life with so much meaning that you don't even notice whether someone is watching or not. That kind of energy changes the entire dynamic. A man begins to feel the absence of your attention, and not because you're punishing him, but because your focus is no longer tethered to his behavior. It's centered on your evolution. In psychological terms, this is what we call self-orientation. The ability to root one's emotional attention in personal growth, rather than external validation. When a woman reclaims her attention, she changes the power dynamic. No longer is she waiting to be chosen. She's choosing her next move. Her days are no longer built around waiting for a reply, analyzing silences, or reading between the lines. They're built around rituals that bring her back to herself. Morning walks, books that challenge her, work that inspires her, boundaries that protect her. The more she lives, the more she becomes a mystery. Not because she's hiding, but because she's expanding in directions he can't track. And here's what's fascinating. When a man senses that your world no longer revolves around him, he starts to move toward you. Not always immediately, not always consciously, but something shifts. The balance of energy is no longer tipped in his favor. You are no longer waiting, you are becoming. And becoming is irresistible. In Shaolin teachings, we are taught to be like water, fluid, calm, and self-sustaining. Water doesn't wait for anything. It flows where it is meant to flow. A woman who embraces this way of being no longer needs to control outcomes. She doesn't try to keep anyone in her life. She simply keeps flowing. And if someone wants to walk beside her, they must move with the same rhythm. If not, she doesn't stop moving. She doesn't freeze. She doesn't drown. She keeps becoming. You see, many women are taught to build their lives around love. But a high-value woman builds a life love can enter. And the foundation of that life is purpose. When you wake up and your mind is focused on progress. Not perfection, not performance, but web progress. Your energy becomes more rooted. You no longer act from scarcity. You no longer wonder if he likes you. You wonder if his presence adds to the life you're already creating. Men feel this difference deeply. They may not articulate it in philosophical language, but they sense it. When you're not available 247, not because you're avoiding him, but because your life is full. That's when the pull begins. He starts to notice the gap your attention used to fill. And in that gap, questions emerge. Where did her focus go? Why doesn't she need me like before? What is she thinking about? Who is she becoming? That's how obsession grows. Not from your pursuit of him, but from his curiosity about the woman you're becoming without him. And perhaps the greatest irony of it all is this: when a woman stops watching his every move, he begins watching hers. When she's no longer reacting to his silence, he starts questioning her peace. When she stops asking, "Where is this going?" he starts asking, "Where did she go?" So if you want to shift the energy, don't speak louder. Don't love harder. Don't shrink smaller. Instead, live fuller. Let your life speak. Let your movement be the message. Because when you stop centering him and start centering yourself, you become someone he can't stop thinking about. And remember, a woman who is focused on her path doesn't chase. She doesn't cling. She doesn't prove. She simply becomes so deeply aligned with herself that anyone who wants access must elevate just to keep up.